Hi, this is Misha, and this is kind of a supplemental video. I was researching to do a video on the German bolt-action service rifles, mostly Mausers, of World War I and World War II. And that video's up, please check it out. But then I kind of went down a tangent path, a rabbit hole. And I mentioned a little bit of this in that video, but I didn't want to bog it down too much. So if you're here, maybe you're interested and find the subject intriguing as I did. So this video is going to look more at the original Kar.98, or Kar.98A, or Kar.98AZ, or Kar.98A, lowercase. What the crap? What's going on with all these names? And this really intrigued me. I try to get stuff, more or less right in my head, at least the big things. I like to get the models and the numbers and general use. I know details, sometimes I get wrong, I'm just doing this as a hobby on the YouTube and just for fun, really. But I got interested. Now, for years, people just considered these Kar.98 or K.98As. That was commonly accepted. Then, a few years ago, 10, maybe 15, a designation of Kar.98AZ came into use. And you saw this a lot on the message boards and still do to this day. Now, if you check on the Kar.98AZ, people will say, okay, there was a Kar.98, then a Kar.98A with a large uppercase A, then the Kar.98AZ, again uppercase, and they'll say that the Kar.98AZ was this gun here, the short rifle used by the Germans in World War I, and that the Kar.98 lowercase a, this gun was renamed to in 1923 after the Treaty of Versailles and when the Kar.98B was adopted. Okay, that seems, follow that. The flaw I found in this argument is I tried to look up and see what exactly the Kar.98A was, the uppercase A. And I couldn't find anything. And that got me digging into all the names and stuff. To kind of recap the history, after the Gewehr.98 rifle was adopted, they started to work on having a carbine to go with. The first prototypes, definitely by 1900, you'll see some people with guns with receivers dated earlier, but I have to wonder if those are the original receivers, because the original Kar.98 carbine used a large ring action, so a standard 98 receiver would work fine. Either way, 1900 troop trials. The carbine was officially adopted in June of 1902 and went into full-scale production in 1903. It had a 17.7-inch barrel, which, by the way, that information alone was a little hard to find. You can find a lot of sources saying the original Kar.98 carbine had a short barrel, but getting the exact number, it took a little bit of digging. So, it's a 17.7-inch barrel, overall length of about 37.5 inches. It was a short, handy little gun, very analogous to, say, the Swedish carbine, the Swedish M94. I'm back. So I went and grabbed my Swedish 1894 carbine. This is not really that close in the details to the original German Kar.98, but it has about the same weight, size, overall dimensions. This does have a 17.7-inch barrel. This is an older import. It does have a small extension, silver soldered on, because when these were coming in, they had to have barrels over 18 inches. So pretend like the barrel were to end at the nose cap here. But they got a short barrel, short tangent sight, turn down bolt handle, early version of the pass-through sling that Germany would later make famous. 5-round mag. This is a small ring Mauser. The Germans would be a large ring. It gives you a general size idea. The original Kar.98s, they would try several different versions. This was still back in the era of trying to adopt a specific version for different troops. Cavalry would want a version with a bayonet lug. Artillery would want a version with a stacking swivel. You would have other people that didn't want either feature. They played around with it, tried to customize it. The gun was relatively short-lived, though. They only got about 20,000 out before production was halted in 1905. This is because the short barrel worked fine for the original J cartridge, or Patron 88, the round nose 8mm. But when they adopted the 8mm Spitzer S cartridge in 1903, they tried using it in such a short, light gun. Again, dimensionally about the same as this. And it was just a foot-long flash, huge recoil, huge burst of sound to the guy next to you. Just terribly unpleasant, ineffective. So they said, no, we're going to stop production. And again, production only began at the Erfurt Arsenal in 1903. So very short production run, just over 2.5 years. So they went back to the drawing board. Commission was set up in 1906. Get this out of the way. Getting crowded here. And what they thought to do was make a short rifle. They drew the barrel from 17.7 out to about 23.25 inches. And both of these concepts have been used by other nations. You'll see carbines and short rifle versions of these Mausers used by several South American countries. Argentina, Chile, Venezuela would later use a short rifle. Spain would use several versions. So it wasn't a revolutionary. In fact, by the time this version was starting to get into field testing in 1907, a lot of nations had went to a short rifle as standard issue. Namely among them the USA with the 1903 Springfield. Yay, US for actually being ahead of the curve for once. And also Britain with the SNLE Mark III, short magazine Lee-Enfield. Now, Germany didn't do that. They didn't go making this their standard issue, but they did mass produce it, probably more so than they would have done with a carbine. For example, they only produced about 300,000 Gewehr 88, or Kar.98, I should say, carbines. They made 1.5 million Kar.98s. So, we got that down. We got a longer thing. We went to a longer barrel. Initially, they were going to do the same stuff with having some with stacking rods, some with bayonet lugs, some with neither, I should say, sorry. But they said, you know what, we're going to adopt a version that has both and make it a one-size-fits-all carbine. This was the Kar.98AZ. It stood for bayonet lug and stacking rod in German. This is what it was called. They had several other trials versions with other different German names. The thing is, this was a trials name. AZ was a trials name. When it was officially adopted in January of 1908, the German military simply adopted it as the Kar.98. That was it. I know it's a little confusing because we have an earlier Kar.98 carbine. This was sometimes called an extended carbine, but they essentially kept the same name. And I think the reasoning was pretty sound on their end. They only had made 20,000 of the original. They weren't going to be using them with the same cartridge, the S Spitzer cartridge. So I think they just thought, we're just going to keep things simple. We're just going to stick with the same name. Even though the prototype version of this was called Kar.98AZ, that wasn't its official military name. It would be kind of like calling the US M14 a T-44 because that was its trials name. Lots of guns have different names when they're in the trials phases, and then the military will adopt it as something else, some of the time. You have other times, like with the Colt 1911, it was the Colt Model 1911, it was adopted as the M1911 by the military. But for the most part, the name used in a trials isn't really applicable to the name as adopted. All German records before and during World War I refer to this version as a Kar.98. Simple, no appendices, nothing. It was used in the war. This was pretty much the version that they adopted. The only changes, they went to these grasping grooves in 1915, and then a short time later, they went to the stock takedown disc by around 1916. This one was made by Erfurt in 1916. These Kar.98s were all made by government arsenals: Amberg, Danzig, Erfurt, and Spandau. They were never made by private firms. Now, after the war, these were kept in Weimar service, at least some of them. This is why this has the second date of 1920 on the receiver. What the Weimar Republic did, that was a property mark. A lot of guns had come home with soldiers after World War I. They wanted to rein this in and kind of control civilian ownership of military property guns, so they offered a no questions asked buyback turn-in. And to make sure the same gun wasn't being turned in and then re-liberated and turned in and re-liberated and turned in and re-liberated and turned in and re-liberated for money, because Germans are quite ingenious, and this was at a time of severe economic depression in Germany, they would put the 1920 date on them. So if you see a double-dated gun, you see this most often on Lugers, that means it was accepted into Weimar service after the war. That's kind of neat. In 1923, Germany did the thing with the Kar.98B, and we talked quite a bit about that in our other video, so I don't want to go into it here. It was basically a Gewehr 98 with side sling swivels and a turned-down bolt to be classified as a carbine, so the Treaty of Versailles would let Germany have more of them. But to distinguish it from these guns, the Kar.98s, which were in Weimar service, on paper they started calling them Kar.98As, just to distinguish them. They didn't really mark them that way, they didn't really change that. And since Germany wasn't making new ones after 1918, you know, there's not really a post-war version of this gun. They're all wartime guns. Right here. So in German service, this was the Kar.98 until 1923. Then it was the Kar.98A. There's really no mention of stuff with a Kar.98 uppercase A or lowercase a or AZ, which in a German mindset actually makes a lot more sense if you think about it. That whole thing is very muddled. So my conclusion is that's the name, and that's going by German military references, not what someone wrote in a book or thought. I understand where the AZ came from, and I agree for collectors, just to distinguish this model from the earlier carbine model, it does make sense as a collector, and using it as an informal name works perfectly well. But just to know that that was never a German military designation. And since so few of the Kar.98s exist in the world, I mean, most of the 20,000 that were made were sent to Africa. Very, very few survive. Those that do can be in pretty rough shape. If you have one, you probably know what you have. So Kar.98 or Kar.98A work perfectly well. The A is kind of nice, I agree, just to distinguish it from the B and then the later Kar.98K for Kurs. So I don't mind the suffix there. It just makes it a little easier than just saying Kar.98, because probably if you say Kar.98 today, people will think of the Kar.98K. So that's what my research came up with. You can agree or not, that's okay. And again, I wouldn't be offended if you don't. But that's what I came up with. Here's just kind of laying them side by side if you want to get them on camera. The difference in length between the Swedish gun here and the German, that kind of gives you a look difference at how the original Kar.98 would have compared to a Kar.98A. It's considerably shorter. But while we're talking about Kar.98s, I thought we would take an opportunity to mention one more variant. This is a Polish K.98. See here on the receiver. It's marked. This is essentially a pretty exact copy of the Kar.98A. After the end of World War I, Poland had a bunch of guns. So in 1919, the Polish military said we want to standardize on one cartridge and just a few different guns. They looked at going with something French, Lebel, Berthier, but in the end, it was easier for them to do Mausers. As war reparations, they received the tooling and blueprints from the German Danzig arsenal, and this material was moved to the Radom factory in Poland in 1921. By 1922, Radom was turning out pretty close copies of the original Gewehr 98 long rifle, known as the KBWZ-98. A short time later, they would also start turning out copies of the Kar.98 or Kar.98A. The dates are a little fuzzy. 23, 24 is when they started. They probably ran them through about 1929, 1930. So they would make them throughout the 20s. And they would do a very close job of copying it. We have the 23¼ barrel. We have the very distinctive front sight protectors here. We even have the little clip to attach the muzzle cap with. Very nice. We have the bayonet lug very close to the end of the barrel. We have the hinged front barrel band. We have the rear barrel band held on with a screw. This screw is not original, it's a replacement. When I got the gun, it didn't have anything, so I stuck something in there. We have a full-length upper handguard. We still have the same tangent rear sight. We're using a small ring action, just like on the original German. They even copied the turn down and flat cut checkered bolt handle. Shoot, they even copied the relocated trigger and all that, the slightly different dimensions of it being pushed forward in a shorter stock. The trigger guard is a slightly different shape than the German, but it's still moved. And then we have the shorter stock. Now there are some differences, mostly to do with the furniture. Starting at the front, that has a stacking rod, like the German. But if you notice, instead of just being bent and coming down, it actually has a separate piece here. It's square in shape and then comes out. This was probably actually a lot stronger because it's much beefier in this area. So it looks like that was a good change. This upper handguard was also strengthened. It has dowel rods here and here to reinforce it. Make the upper handguard a little stronger. That's how you can tell a Polish upper handguard from a German. On the front sling, on the sling swivels, we have the standard German style bar. Then we also have a second lower swivel here for a more traditional way of carrying it if needs be. The rear sling swivels are actually quite different. We got away from the German pass-through style, and now we have a side bar with a cutout in the stock, and then we have another lower swivel right here. I would imagine that was a really good change. This let them use pretty much any standard sling on this thing. And it kind of eliminated a hole in the stock, which maybe they felt was a weak point. One other final minor difference, it'll be impossible to really show on camera, but the grasping groove on the side here is ever so slightly forward. They moved this groove a little bit forward, so these two grooves are not perfectly symmetrical as on the German gun. And I'm sure they did this again for ergonomics because of how a right-handed person would hold the gun. Makes perfect sense to me. So the changes that the Radom factory did to the Kar.98A design make perfect sense. Again, they would just designate the gun as Kar.98, sometimes referred to as KWZ-98. And they would make these for a little, 5, 6, 7 years during the 1920s. These would eventually be replaced by the WZ-29, which was another short rifle, which was a little more customized for Polish use and had some lessons learned from this one and so on and so forth. This is a side note for these guns like this one. The reason why this one is scrubbed on the receiver here on the top is Poland would sell or send a good number of weapons to Spain during its civil war. So I guess to hide the country of origin, some of them would be scrubbed. So a lot of guns like this one actually made in Poland and came here via Spain. Kind of interesting. So if you see a scrubbed Polish gun, that's probably what happened to it. It was in the Spanish Civil War. This, of course, still fires 8mm Spitzer, just like the original German. But yeah, just thought I'd show one other version of the Kar.98A pattern. That's pretty much the only real copy or clone of the gun ever made. No one else really ever went to it, even though a lot of people used the, wrong gun. A lot of people used the Kar.98K pattern. Not many actually used the Kar.98A. Just to show you the German one more time. So that was my research into the naming conventions behind these. You can agree or disagree. I'm not saying I'm 100% right or that I'm the authority. I'm just saying after my research, that's the conclusion I came to. Agree, disagree, it's no big deal. Just, interesting to kind of talk about these points of history, I think. I think it's a really neat gun. These saw a lot of use in World War I. They were still sometimes in use in World War II. Although, at that point, not many, but the Germans did still field these in the 40s. The ones that they still had left. But yeah, that is what I've dug into with the whole Kar.98, Kar.98A, Kar.98AZ, Kar.98 Big Case A, Kar.98, Karab, Karab, 98, just all the different names. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I know this was kind of more of a nerdy nitpicking video. That's why I made it separate. But hey, it was fun researching it. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed learning about these guns. Hope you enjoyed watching. This is Misha, and please click like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you haven't already. And please tune in again soon for hopefully more interesting and unique guns. We'll catch you next time.